What I want you to do this afternoon is first of all put those things out of your hands that you have in your hand. And then the next thing I want you to do is stand up, find someone that you have not met this weekend yet, and introduce yourself. Okay, one of the first principles of counseling and working with anyone in the helping profession is that we tend to sort of distrust individuals that we don't know, and getting to know someone just helps a little bit more in rapport. The format of this session this afternoon, we're going to be having some practical exercises as well as hearing from me on some things. I'm actually going to give you a counseling model that is adaptable to use in the astrological situation. The particular model that I'm using is one developed by Gerard Egan, if there are any individuals in the social work field or counseling area may have heard him. First of all, I'd like to start off with a little Sufi story that has something to say about counseling. And this is called The Watermelon Hunter. Once upon a time, there was a man who strayed from his own country into the world of the land of fools. He soon saw a number of people flying in terror from a field where they had been trying to reap wheat. There was a monster in that field, they told him. He looked and saw that it was a watermelon. He offered to kill the monster for them. When he had cut the melon from its stalk, he took a slice and began to eat it. The people became even more terrified of him than they had been of the melon. They drove him away with pitchforks, crying, "He will kill us next, unless we get rid of him." Then it so happened that another time, another man also strayed into the land of fools, and the same thing started to happen to him. But instead of offering to help them with this monster, he agreed with him that it must be dangerous, and by tiptoeing away from it, he gained their confidence. He spent a long time with him in the houses until he could teach them little by little the basic facts which would enable them not only to lose their fear of melons, but even to cultivate themselves. Well, that's the basis of all effective counseling, the development of trust and rapport, and we're too quick to help another individual directly without gaining the rapport first. Now, people come to an astrologer for a lot of reasons, but generally there's some type of an underlying problem. Not always, but most of the time there is. Now, they are going to approach you as a person who is going to give some advice and some help. So whether you like it or not, you're going to be put into a helping role when someone comes to have their astrological chart read. They're going to desire a magical cure, especially from astrologers. Now, how many people really work out their problems logically? Well, almost no one. Most of us seem to muddle through our life, but we could be doing just a lot better. Now, how do we know when we've been helpful with another individual when they've come for assistance? If the individual can go away having more options in their own life than they thought they had before they came, you have been successful. And you be constantly asking yourself, and whatever I'm doing, will this really assist that person? Now, our views of reality differ considerably. The astrologer may have one, the client another. For example, suppose you're an astrologer and you value love very much in your life. You're going to emphasize that in your counseling. A counselor who feels that discipline is very important in life is going to stress this with her clients. Counselors who believe that growth and progress is not possible unless you suffer and go through pain are going to encourage you to do the same thing as the client. Another little story from the Sufi philosophy. This is the king who divined his future. A king who was also an astrologer read in the stars that on a certain day and at a particular hour a calamity would overtake him. He therefore built a house of solid rock and posted numerous guardians around. One day when he was within, he realized that he could still see daylight. He found an opening which he filled up to prevent misfortune entering. In blocking this door, he made himself a prisoner with his own hands, and because of this, the king died. Now, as counselors, we need to be constantly asking ourselves how much an individual is locking themselves into a very restrictive philosophy of life or basic assumptions. A lot of the assumptions that we live by, we never question, especially ones that we've been indoctrinated with. Some of my own framework and my own life, to help you know some of my own value system, I like Jung's idea of the polarities, that everything has both its positive and its negative potential, and I feel that same way about all of the planets. I use what is called rational motive therapy in some of my work, quite a lot. I also use transactional analysis and the basic counseling model of Gerard Egan. Myself, I work as a counselor and a psychologist in private practice in Victoria. I feel that the planets reflect, not cause, behavior within individuals. Those configuration of planets in the horoscope are a symbolic language. However, I still appreciate individuals like Gosselin, who is trying to find a direct cause and effect link between the planets and life here on Earth. Punch magazine had a joke several years ago, and it was a husband and wife sitting at home watching the TV. And on the news broadcast, it was stated, astrology has now finally been proven true. All Scorpios were hit by a milk truck last night. And I'm afraid that's the way some of our astrology goes. Okay, I'd like for you to look at the configurations up here on the screen. I want you to just have a look. What does it remind you of? What type of picture can you make out of that by putting the lines together? So, would you just have a look? See what type of pictures you see in those lines up there. Okay, now I'd like for you to just tell the individual sitting beside you the type of things you see in the lines up here. What type of pictures are you generating? Just share that with the people sitting around you. Okay, that's good. Could a few of you just now share share with the whole group some of the pictures you see in that. May I hear a few? Yes? Okay, someone else. Yes. A dog? Okay, someone else. Pardon?
A clown.
Okay.
And arthritis, special part wrestling camp.
Okay. Right. Okay, a chook, a bird. Okay. We as human individuals put things together when they're not in any really particular order. Those are random lines. But now I'm going to show you a few examples of what some other individuals saw, and they drew those. Okay, here's the first one. That's what one person saw. You can see where the different lines were used. Here's another. Okay, and one more. Okay, all of those pictures there were generated by emotionally disturbed juvenile delinquents that I was working with in Riverside, California about 10 years ago. We seem to need to have patterns within our lives, and those particular configurations were no different really than the ink blocks that we use in ink block tests. It's what we project into those things that can become valuable. One of the things that we have to do in our lives is filter. One of the major functions of our brain is to filter out the relevant from the non-relevant information in our lives. And when we have contradictory perceptions in our lives, we just generally tend to dismiss these. Like at one time, it was known that, yes, the world was flat. And anything that contradicted that was disowned. Out of these patterns that we have in our lives, we develop maps. Now, one of the difficulties that we have, and we do this in astrology too, is that we create maps out of reality and act as if that map is reality, with our fed-in assumptions, prejudices, values, and backgrounds. Now, a map is not the territory, a menu is not the meal, and the view of the world is not the world, and a map is just a map, and a horoscope is just a horoscope. Distressed people make maps even more restricted and even see those maps even more real within their lives. For example, back in the medieval times, church bells were consecrated in order to keep evil spirits away. However, during thunderstorms, it was believed that thunderstorms were due to the evil spirits. Well, unfortunately, a lot of bell ringers were killed by lightning. Now, the horoscope is a map, and it's a pattern of the stars that seems to reflect things to us. Now, what about some of the basic goals of astrological counseling? First of all, we need to help other persons to recognize that they are creating maps in their own lives. Then we need to assist those individuals to develop and design more fulfilling maps within their lives. Unfortunately, destructive patterns tend to be repeated over and over and over. individuals going into a marriage and making the same repetitive mistakes. Well, once we alter maps in our lives, a person's behavior and experience also tends to alter. Therefore, as I mentioned at the beginning, one of the main goals of counseling is for an individual to see more options when they leave than they have when they arrive. In a little book by Maritha Pottinger, she has a book called Healing with the Horoscope, and she talks about counseling going through 3 phases. One is establishing rapport, secondly is gathering information, and thirdly is developing new models of the world. Those are not bad. However, I think it's just a little restrictive because we also need to have models on how to carry out action programs in our lives. Okay, I'm now going to introduce you to a counseling model. This one is by Egan. Okay, here are the first 4 main steps. I'm going to then relate it to astrological consultation. These are the first 4 steps in a counseling model. Number 1 is identifying the problem situation, the identification of the problem situation. That's the first step. Step number 2 is focusing and clarification of the problem situation. Third, development of new perspectives. Number 4, desired goals. Okay, those are the first 4 steps. Identification of the problem situation, focusing and clarification of the problem situation, development of new perspectives, and desired goals. Well, that's still not quite enough, so we have 4 more stages to go through. Now, if you didn't get them all jotted down at this time, don't worry, because we're going to come back to this several times. Step number 5 is strategy synthesis. Number 6 is strategy choice and program. 7 is action. 8 is evaluation. Now, too often we take counseling to be one step, help someone, but it's really not quite that simple. There are 8 major steps that we need to go through. And I'll put these up summarized now. Okay, I have them in different colors for a particular reason, because at each stage we're operating just a bit differently. In all of the green areas, we are generating information. Therefore, we need to brainstorm that particular area. That's all of the green ones, 1, 3, 5, and 7. We need to become expanders and to gather as much information of that area as we can. All of the blue areas are the decision-making steps. That means that each of the blue steps you need to narrow down and focus. So what we really have is collect lots of information. Now focus on a particular problem area. Then we go back developing new perspectives of that problem area. We start generating and brainstorming lots of ideas of new ways of seeing that. Number 4, we now to get back some goals from step 3. So we narrow down. Step number 6, strategy, choice, and program. This is a decision-making area where we need to narrow our focus. 7, action. We need to gather some more data. And number 8 means we need to focus on our material once again. Now, was it? Yes.
Could you expand a little on an action that just seems to come there? The others are fairly descriptive, but I mean, what do you do, jump up and down? Or?
Action is how you carry out the particular program that you selected or the strategy in order to solve the problem situation.
How you carry out such?
Right. And I'll be coming back to these once again with actual examples. Now, individuals quite often do not need help at all 8 of these stages. They may need help at a particular stage. Now, the area where most individuals need some more assistance is number 3, development of new perspectives. That means seeing the situation from different viewpoints and in different ways.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Where do you get that source from?
Gerard Egan, the skilled helper.
Thank you.
Okay?
How did you come to that conclusion?
Of this particular model here?
Sorry?
Of this particular model,
Yes.
you mean?
Yes. Point 3.
Oh, point 3.
Yes.
Okay, development of new perspectives. Okay, first of all, we've generated some problem situations. We've now focused down and selected a particular problem situation under new perspectives right here. This is a way of looking at that situation from various different viewpoints that a person had never thought of before. That's one of the major things that an individual needs to do in the counseling process, to help an individual to see other options that they hadn't seen before regarding a particular problem area. Okay, a few other things that we need to add in, and then we'll bring it back to an astrological situation. Well, we won't get anywhere unless we have rapport with our particular client. In other words, a good working relationships and trust. Now, that's one of the most crucial things for a counselor to have, is rapport with the client. It's not quite so important which technique you use, whether you're going to use Jungian approach or Sigmund Freud or Gerard Egan or transactional analysis. It's not quite so important which technique you use, it's how you go about it and how you develop rapport with your clients. And another thing in counseling, in order to be effective, we need to learn how to be specific and concrete about situations. Taking, for example, an individual says, I'm unhappy. It's very difficult to help an individual with that until you become much more specific. In what ways, how are you unhappy? Then you can start focusing on that. Empathy in rapport, that's being able to step into the shoes of the other individual and see it from their perspective, but still not get lost in their shoes and lose your own particular identity. Your body posture is very important in a counseling situation. It helps to face the person fairly squarely, develop an open posture, lean forward a bit, have adequate eye contact, but still be relaxed. Just adopting that particular posture alone can make quite a difference as to whether an individual is going to be defensive or not. Suppose you're sitting in your chair, reclining backwards, your arms and legs crossed and all folded up with your feet upon the desk. You're sort of giving the person the idea that you're sort of bowing out of the situation and not particularly interested in what they are saying. So it helps to face the person fairly squarely, have an open posture, leaning slightly forward, have adequate eye contact, and still remain relaxed. A few other things to avoid is not having the person sitting in front of a bright window, looking across at a big desk. That sets up a barrier too. And other things to avoid in developing a good rapport with the client is to avoid jargon too much, like Mars, the sesquiquadrate to Neptune. Put it in a language that the individual can understand. Be very clear as an astrologer, as a counselor, as what you can and cannot do with the client. Example, do you want to be seen as a fortune teller or a psychiatrist or whatever? Be clear as to what you can and cannot do in this situation. And be clear what your training in the astrological field is too. Okay, just briefly, one other area that a few of you may have heard of is called NLP. This is called Neuro-Linguistic Programming. There are a few tips that we can pick up from this particular theory too. People, especially in the Western world, tend to interpret the world through three major sensory channels: the visual, the auditory, or the kinesthetic. Now, to give you an example, a person's language tends to support those particular areas. A person who tends to see the world more in visual terms and operate as a visual person will talk more often with such words as, "That's clear, I get the image, I see what you're talking about." That's a visual individual. I've noticed many radio announcers use the word see. "I will see you next week," when you cannot see the radio broadcaster. Visual individuals, when they are thinking through a problem situation, will tend to unfocus their eyes and to look slightly upward with their eyes scanning upward. We have a second group of people that tend to operate more in an auditory fashion when they're solving a problem. They hear voices and conversations going on in the auditory channel, and they will use such languages as, "I can hear what you're saying, that rings a bell to me, you're coming in loud and clear." Individuals that tend to process things in an auditory fashion when they're working out a problem situation will turn their eyes downward and look to the left. Now there's only about 10% of the population that operates on an auditory channel. Most individuals are visual. And finally, thirdly, we have kinesthetic. This is how things feel. And the types of a kinesthetic person would be saying in their language is, "I feel what you're saying, I grasp what you say, I'm getting in touch with what you're saying." A kinesthetic person, when they're working out a problem situation, will dip their eyes down and look to the right. Now, we all do that when we're having a particular type of visual stimulation. You may want to try this out with some individuals later that know nothing about neuro-linguistic programming. For example, ask an individual just to relax and to imagine that they're hearing a particular song in their head. While that person is trying to get that song in their head, their eyes will dip down and will look to the left when they're thinking that way. Tell an individual to visualize that they are feeling something very rough, cold, scratchy, and as they're going through that visualization, their eyes will drop down and look toward the right. And when you ask an individual to visualize something in their head, to get a picture in the head, their eyes will tend to unfocus and look straight ahead or upwards. So this is something that you may just want to check out. It gives you a clue as to what mode or channel an individual is operating on at that particular time.
the neuro-linguistic programming, how does it see the three sensory mechanisms in terms of balance as opposed to individual aspects?
You mean, how do you balance the three out?
Does NLP see it as important to integrate those factors?
Yes, that's one of the major purposes if you're working with an individual like that. For example, if you have an individual who tends to hear hallucinations all the time in their head, they would have their eyes dipping down and looking toward the left. One of the ways of working with an individual is to help them to practice on the other sensory modes, because it brings out a better balance with the individual. The majority of people will be visual, and the individuals that are visual respond better to charts, graphs, and so forth in a teaching type situation. It's something that teachers need to keep in mind in the schools too, because there will be a few children that do not respond to the visual but respond to the auditory, and you get a lot more out of things by hearing them. But the whole idea is to bring a little more balance into your life. Okay, back to our counseling model, and let's see how we can start putting this together and using some astrological situations. First, step one is identification of the problem situation. Most individuals that come to us do not state what's really concerning them straight away. This is especially true for psychologists, psychiatrists, and so forth, but it's relatively true of astrologers too, that an individual does not really state what their main problem area is to begin with until some rapport is generated. Okay, in step one, identification of the problem area. This is just where you need to really brainstorm with the individual. This is where the individual needs to tell sort of the story of their life there. At this point, they should be just sharing with you and you not evaluating at that particular point. Too often, we're going to immediately give a solution or advice to an individual. As soon as they step in or as soon as they say something, that's usually not advisable, because what's really more pressing in their life really hasn't come up at that particular point. Now, what I want you to do here is to take this particular situation. Suppose we have a Mars, Saturn, Uranus, T-square. Suppose we have a Mars, Saturn, Uranus, T-square. Now, that's all far that I want to go at that particular point, because it's very general. What I want you to do now is to start generating possible difficulties that will come out of that Mars, Saturn, Uranus, T-square. What are some of the different problem areas that may arise in that particular person's life? At this point, I don't want to use any houses or anything. So would you now just quickly jot down a few of the problem areas that may possibly occur out of a Mars, Saturn, Uranus, T-square?
Is Mars, Uranus the opposition?
Yes. As soon as you jot down a few, share them with the people sitting beside you. Just share your ideas with the person sitting beside you. Okay, could we just have a few of these tossed out to the group as a whole? What are some of those potential situations from that? Yes.
Prison work.
Pardon?
Prison work.
Okay. Yes.
What do you wrestle without a cause?
Okay. We're just generating as many ideas as we can at this point.
Job changing.
Job changing?
Frustration.
Frustration?
No self-esteem.
No self-esteem? A lot of energy that can't be used.
Social isolation.
Social isolation.
Difficulty expressing anger.
Different ways of expressing anger or difficulties with.
Frustration, anger, and eruption.
Okay. Depression.
Violent injury.
Pardon?
Violent injury.
Okay. Violent injury. Okay, what we've just been operating now at stage 1 of this particular counseling model here. What we've done is just generated a few problematical situations that may arise out of that. At that particular stage, you should not evaluate or judge or interpret any of those things at that particular stage. The suggestions are just tossed out at that particular point. You as an astrologer could be tossing out these different areas at that point, possibles from this difficult aspect. Now, what you do, step number 2, you've had a bit of a brainstorming or tossing out section here of all the type of things this may generate. You could start saying at this particular point, now, do any of these tend to really fit you? What are some of those situations that are really tending to affect you or have meaning in your particular life? So now what you're trying to do is focus down on that potential problem situation. Focusing down on it, okay? So in step 1, you're just exploring different possibilities, not specifics. So we need to be careful also how we state at that point. It is possible that you have a great deal of difficulty in expressing your anger. Potentially, you may repress your anger until it really breaks through, and etc. Those are some of the things that you can start tossing out to see if they make any sense to the individual. Now, it's time to be a little more specific. In my own counseling work, I get individuals so often saying, I want to be a happier person in my life. I don't want to be depressed so much. That doesn't give you anywhere to go because you do not have any specifics yet. So in step 2, you now focus and clarify that particular problem situation. And this is becoming specific and concrete. In other words, in what ways, how, when, where does this affect you in your life? We may have an individual who is consistently getting fired with this particular planetary configuration. Okay, now the person has selected an area that they may want to focus on. One example here may be difficulties in anger management. We have to decide after step 2 now, is that problem really worthwhile? Is it worth investing the time in that problem area to go and work on it? If it's not, you scrap it and you find something that is more potentially rewarding for the person to work on. Now we need to go to step number 3 and develop some new perspectives on the problem situation. In other words, looking at the problem situation from different angles than you've looked at it from before. What you really need to do at step number 3 is help the person move beyond their blind spots within their life, and also to help them break out of some of the frames that they've set up around them. We could call step number 3 frame breaking, breaking down some of the frames in your life. It's better to give the individual positive challenges rather than focusing on their unused and negative assets in their life.
we're going to have a perspective exercise here now. Now, if you've seen this picture before, don't say anything about it yet. Some of you have seen this, some of you have not. Just have a look at that, and what do you see in this picture? Okay, first of all, how many of you have seen the picture before? Just raise your hands. Okay, about half the group. Okay, some of the individuals who have not seen that picture before, what do you see in that?
A young woman and an old woman.
Old woman, young woman? Okay, there's both in that picture. There's a young woman and there's an old woman, both in that same picture. We're working with our perceptions here at the moment. You're working with your perceptions, how you see something. As soon as we get locked into something, it's very hard to see any other options in it. That's one of your major roles as a counselor, is to help an individual to see a different perspective that they just have not been able to see before. Okay, to give you a little bit of help, I'll cover up part of it. I cover that up there. This helps you to see the young woman a bit better. Right here is her nose, her eyelash, and her chin right there, going up to her ear. This is the ear. That's the young woman. Can you pick that up? Okay, if you're seeing the old woman, this is her mouth, and this is an eye up here if you're seeing the old woman. And you're seeing that is coming off as the nostril, the nose, which happens to be the chin of the young lady. Now, if you can't see both, what you need to do is glance away from it just a bit and then look at it once again and close your eyes part way. Are you succeeding? As soon as you develop one specific perspective, it's hard to see the alternative. Have you all seen both pictures? I want you to just concentrate on this picture right here, just that one. Have a good look at that one and see what you see. They're two entirely different pictures. Two entirely different pictures in that one. It depends what you focus on first, and whatever you focus on first tends to become what is called our foreground. The rest of it just drops into the background and we don't see it. What you need to do is do the reversal here. The thing that you've been concentrating on the most, let it blur into the background and look at what you've been avoiding looking at. A few people have picked it up. Yes. Okay. What are some of the things that you've seen in that picture? Okay, there's a series of naked women in that picture. And they're pillars. And they're pillars. Have you picked it up? Have you all picked it up? I think there's a few that may not have. Okay, here's the woman's head, the breast, and her foot, the profile. There's a profile of a woman between all of the pillars right here. Can you see it now? Well, once we get focused on something, it's very hard to get away from it. It's very hard for astrologers sometimes to get away from a Mars square Saturn. It just has to be bad and horrific, not looking at some of its other potentials. But you, as a counselor, need to help the individual to see a problem situation from an entirely new angle, and preferably angles, as many as you can. Had you ever stopped to think about this or this or this in that particular situation? Now, I want you to go back to Mars, Saturn, Uranus, T-square. There's a little more work to do on it right now. What I want you to do this time is to present as many possible perceptions or ways of viewing that Mars, Saturn, Uranus, T-square, both positively and negatively. What are some of the positive ways that Mars, Saturn, Uranus, T-square can be used, and what are some of the negative ways of using that? Okay, I'd like for you to just generate a few ideas on that, positive and negative potentials from that, for the person to be able to see something from perhaps a new perspective they hadn't thought of before, and then discuss it with the people you're sitting beside you. Okay, let's hear a few things that have been generated here now. If you're suggesting the person use it in a positive way, what are some of the suggestions you may give there? Have you ever considered, what about the possibility of, what are some of the positive ways of using that?
Driving an ambulance or driving a tank.
Okay, getting pretty specific there, right?
Focusing on the intent energy.
Pardon?
Specific focusing on the intent energy.
Okay, okay, you use that focus, right.
Something like a punk rock band or modern dance as a release for that sort of energy and innovative and Aquarian sort of way.
Okay, this will depend on your client. You may have a Catholic nun. Once again? Harnessing energy, okay? Right.
Able to see structures necessary to resolve unexpected situations.
Okay.
And expressed in useful and practical ways that enhance the status.
Okay. Yes.
New ideas initiated by Mars, disciplined and structured by Saturn.
Okay. Yes.
Working hard on a project that leads to personal freedom of choice.
That's excellent. That kind of gets everything in that one right there. Very good. Do you see how you're giving the person
some potentials to move around in they hadn't seen before.
Would you please repeat what lady contributed there?
Yes, would you like to repeat your statement there?
Working hard on a project that leads to personal freedom of choice.
Okay, working very hard on a project that needs personal freedom within it. Okay, something non-conventional.
Or reform, basically. Working on areas of reform.
Working on areas of reform. Okay, so you're now helping your client to see the positive potential out of this situation, the ways that it may affect them. For example, it could be setting up quite an inner conflict within the individual, needing to be independent, free, and to go places, versus the desire to follow the rules and structures of a society or some type of form of structure. Therefore, if that person doesn't handle this and fights against that, they can get in a lot of difficult situations of arguments with boss, spouse, and so forth. A person could end up overemphasizing rules of society in their own head, but this person also needs some freedom and independence of expression here in the polarities. Therefore, it's kind of sounding like this person needs to express both sides of their nature. Sometimes they need to express part of it in a career, another part in a sport, or something like that, so that they can get both the non-conventional and the conventional both. Okay, let's go to a new situation. And let's take, for example, we want to get some more new perspectives, a lot of different potential ways of using an astrological configuration. This time, we have a woman with Saturn in the 7th house. Okay, that's all I want to give on that. A woman with Saturn in the 7th house. What are some of the potential ways of using this in a positive way? If not handled positively, what will end up happening to this person? Okay, work on that one just a little bit with your friends. Okay. Let's see what we've generated here now. Okay, what are some of the things that may arise out of this particular configuration?
Expectations of control by the other and a tendency to try and control them to stop it.
Okay. Yes.
Ability to have a very clear idea of what you want in others and therefore in yourself as you move into the world with this house and the other relation.
Okay. Other ideas?
Is this positive or negative or either?
Either one.
We've got down marriage to older men or marriage to authority figures or no marriage at all.
Okay. Right.
Or possibly a marriage counsellor.
Okay. Possibly a marriage counselor?
To try to get her to realise that the marriage is not a limitation, but that she is the rock at the centre of the marriage the others depend upon, building her ego.
Okay. Anything else?
Becoming very clear about the structure of her one-to-one relationship.
Okay.
Time required to preserve the relationship.
Okay. Okay, so we have all types of potentials here. You've been tossing these out as the astrological counselor here. And some of those will hit right on for the person and some won't. So what you've done is generated some possible problematical situations. The person says, yes, that particular one makes a lot of sense to me, so you focus on that particular one. Then you develop some positive ways you could view that particular situation. There's several possibilities in this case. For example, control, predictability, stability, and power could all be concerns in her partnership area. If not handled, this could lead to fear of being dominated, controlled, criticized. Or you might project the power and initially choose someone strong and controlling because he or she seems strong, reassuring, and secure. Or you might end up playing parent in a relationship and carry too much of the load yourself. This could be someone afraid of being dominated, controlled, or criticized. They might avoid marriage altogether or marry late due to anxieties about this, or might pick a strong father figure type who is strong and dominating. Okay, you'd focus on what makes sense for that individual and then work on that particular area. Now let's go a step farther, up to step number 4, some of the desired goals. In other words, what are some of the things that you would like to achieve in this problematical situation? What will it be like when my problem is solved? What will things look like when I get there? What needs to be done? What will you be doing when this goal has been accomplished? If the person cannot describe specifically, you need to keep shaping the goal until it is specific. Goals in our lives need to be stated in what is called accomplishment language, not intent language. And I'll give you an example. Here's an intent, not an accomplishment, but an intent. I would like to decrease the number of times our conversations end up in fights. Okay, that's an intent. Way of putting this in terms of accomplishment language is when the goal has been achieved, there will be less fights, conversations will be enjoyed, disagreement points will be located, feelings will be identified before overreacting, and truer feelings will be expressed. That's the result of achieving the goal. So the emphasis in setting a goal is on what goal, not how you're going to do that, not how you're going to achieve the goal. That comes just a little bit later.
Would you mind running by that distinction again as you portrayed it?
Okay, the last statement?
Yeah.
Okay.
The intent.
Okay.
The accomplishment language.
Okay. We've selected a desired goal to work on. Now, intent is a general statement, where an accomplishment statement is a listing of the things that will be accomplished once the goal has been achieved. The intention can be as, I don't want to be a depressed person anymore. In terms of accomplishment language, I will be able to get out of bed before 11 o'clock in the morning.
The intention is what you might not achieve.
Yes, you might not, because you have to work on that a little bit later to make sure your goals are realistic and your particular action programs are realistic to bring that about.
Excuse me, could you mind saying a few words on how the counsellor avoids laying his about what he thinks the desired goal should be on the individual?
Okay, the best way, and you have to give the client a bit of nudging, when you're working on the type of desired goals that the individual would like to achieve, is to do a bit of brainstorming with them, to toss out as many ideas as they can. Then you can use such statements as, you might possibly want to consider this. Had you ever thought about this? You're not saying you should do this. You're giving them the opportunity to take some of your information that you have too. It makes quite a difference to say you might take this into consideration rather than you must do this. Then you're more
if you
accurate.
are creating a goal that you have thought of. You see what I mean?
You mean a goal for your client.
Yeah, that you have thought of from your background. I know you're not
Yes.
saying you do this, but
Yes, you can toss that in, and if the client wants to pick it up, fine. If they don't, it doesn't have relevance for them. Where your background will add help, surely. But
or bias.
Pardon?
Help or bias. That's what I'm getting. I mean, you can only toss out things that come from you, from your background, which is as a bias to be one help or be able to handle.
Yes, that could be true to a certain extent, although we can get beyond those limitations sometimes too. Some individuals who have never been married or never in a really long-going relationship still can make relatively good marriage counselors, providing they have the proper techniques available. You can always toss your ideas out, but it's the option as to whether they make sense to the person. This mainly comes up in new ways of looking at a situation, getting some new perspectives, new ideas on a situation. Okay, let's look at number 5 now. Okay, number 4 was to arrive at some type of a goal. For example, your health may have been playing up, so perhaps one of your goals is to get more fit or whatever. Okay, at strategy census, once again you have to brainstorm of all the possible strategies that you could use in order to achieve your goal. In other words, this is the how now, how you go about something. At this particular stage, I advise people at this step to think really crazy, wild, and far out as a way of achieving their goal. And sometimes those really wild, totally ridiculous ways of achieving that goal, within it is a little seed of possibility that can be used within it. The person has been a workaholic, so they give an example, well, I think I'll fly to Fiji for the weekend, or whatever. Now, out of some of the unrealistic types of strategies that we give sometimes can be a potential for something that can be very helpful. So you think really crazy at step number 5 in your strategy census. Most individuals end up staying in a problem situation just because they haven't used their imagination or creativity enough. And that's the time to really use that. I'll give you an example of a problematical situation and how this particular one was solved. And this is another Sufi story. Notice how they arrived at achieving a goal in this one. A powerful king, ruler of many dominions, was in a position of such magnificence that wise men were mere employees. And yet one day he felt himself confused and called the sages to him. He said, I do not know the cause, but something impels me to seek a certain ring, one that will enable me to stabilize my state. Here at number 4. That's his goal. I must have such a ring, and this ring must be one which, when I am unhappy, will make me joyful. At the same time, if I am happy and look upon it, I must behave sad. The wise men consulted one another and threw themselves into deep contemplation. And finally they came to a decision as to the character of this ring which would suit their king. The ring which they devised was one upon which was inscribed the legend, this too will pass. And the solution was achieved. Okay? You have to think a little crazy and a little wild to come up with a solution of solving what seems to be almost an impossible goal. Too often individuals will grab the very first suggestion that is thrown out without trying other suggestions. But they usually do that because the counselor hasn't given enough options for them to work from anyway. Step number 6, strategy, choice, and program. Well, the strategy is how you go about making some progress with your problem situation. In other words, this is selecting the best fit strategy to achieve your own goal. This is where you help your client fine-tune a selected program. Well, suppose the individual did want to get more physically fit. There are several options. One is joining a health club. May be too expensive. The person may have some other limitations within their health, but you have to pick the strategy that works best for that one particular individual. In one case, it may be a 30-minute walk. For another person, it may be signing up in a health club, taking a regular aerobics program, joining Weight Watchers, and so forth. So it has to fit the individual. Okay, you picked out the strategy, perhaps of joining the health club. Well, number 7 is where you carry it out. Now, most of the counseling books that I've seen out on the market stop at 6. They never really go on to carrying out a specific program and how it went. So in number 7, for action, we need to put into practice what we're going to achieve on our goal. What are some of the difficulties that might be encountered if you use a particular strategy to achieve a particular goal? You join an aerobics class, and then you end up pulling the tendons in your leg because you just overdid it. So you have to get the best, look at all the possible difficulties that may arise at this point. What resources that you need. But step number 7, you should always take into consideration in carrying out your goal, anything that could go wrong will possibly go wrong. Or Murphy's Law, anything that could go wrong does. And you need to do that when you're carrying out the actions of achieving your goal. And finally, number 8 is where you evaluate it. Did it work? Or does it need to be retailored? How well did it go? Was the client satisfied? Was it realistic at all?
Is it the counselor you're saying? He evaluates, not the
with
client?
Both together, counselor and client. Yes. Did it cost too much? Did it take up too much of your time? Was it too psychologically draining? Was it realistic? In other words, you evaluate it at this particular point here. And quite a good thing at that particular point is a phone call, is to tell the individual after they've started carrying out their program how it's going, to give you a bit of a ring on the telephone. Now, this overall model, I know people are put off by models a little bit, or structures, or forms. It is 8 different ways It is 8 different ways of being with another person. It's 8 ways of interacting with another individual. When we're assisting an individual, not all of those steps are always necessary. In fact, quite often they are not. It depends where the client is in their life and what particular stage they seem to be stuck at. Most often, developing new perspectives, step number 3, is enough. That's usually enough for most individuals because they say, well, I haven't really thought of it that way. That's a different way of looking at it. I've been setting myself up in these self-defeating relationship situations. Sometimes maybe just step number 5 is enough. Sometimes maybe individuals reach all types of goals and things to do in their life, but they never put it into action. Maybe they need some guidance on how to put it into action. So this is the way the model works. Step 1, you expand as much as you can. Throw in as much data as possible. 2, you narrow down. 3, expand once again as much data as you can. Number 4, you narrow down to something specific. 5, in strategy synthesis, you generate lots of ideas again. 6, you select one. 7, you throw out a lot of different potential action programs, and you select one. And finally, 8, you evaluate how it worked. This particular model is quite effective in working with businesses and banks and so forth to solve problem situations in an organization. So it's just not a therapeutic type model, but it's a very good model to use in working through some goals and purposes in your life. Now, some individuals are just expanders. They generate loads of ideas, just loads of ideas, but they never put them to use. I'm not talking about clients and counselors both. There can be counselors who generate loads of new ideas for the client, but doesn't give them any specifics on how to use them or how to go about it. Well, some people are not expanders. They're always focusers. They constantly focus on everything, and they're operating 2, 4, 6, and 8 most of the time in their life and not doing enough expanding. That's clients and counselors too. The person who focuses too narrowly on the horoscope, too narrow in their interpretations, those individuals tend to focus far too soon and make decisions far too soon in their lives. Therefore, they end up being rather rigid and dogmatic. Now, quickly, I want you to jot down on your paper an imaginary description of your favorite astrological client and a little description of your most unfavorite type of astrological client. Your favorite type of astrological client is what type of person. Your most unfavorite is what type. Would you quickly jot those down? Be very quick, spontaneous, don't censor. Don't censor. Type of clients you adore and the type you can't stand.
Okay, I hope you have a few positive things down. Now, on your hated type of client, just jot a few of those down. We're not going to share these in the group. I'll tell you what to do with them in just a moment. So make sure you have a few items for both your favorite and detested type of client. Put a tick mark beside the ones that generate the most emotion in you, the strongest feelings. Put some tick marks beside the ones that generate the strongest feelings. Okay. With those two descriptions that you generated, you may have come up with some problematical situations in your own life. The type of traits that we can't stand in other people, and especially if it has an emotional charge, is a trait that we have within ourselves that we're trying not to accept. The same can be with the very positive clients too. Maybe the type of client you just absolutely adore, the gentle, really loving individual. You have that potential in yourself, but you're not using it. Therefore, you project it onto someone else. Or you just can't stand the loudmouth person who dominates everything, and maybe you do that yourself. So you may have identified a few problem situations there, which you would be able to generate through those to see what you might do about it. We call this projection in psychology. We project a trait within ourselves onto someone else and not really aware it's one of our own traits. Now, I'm not saying everything you put on your hated client is a trait of your own, but you have to be careful. There's seeds of potential there. But an area where counselors have to be really careful is not to project their own problems onto their clients and use the clients as their way of working out problems in their own lives. You have to be very careful of that one.
Is there some way we can actually find out whether that's we are projecting or not? Is there some specific...
To find out what?
If we are projecting or not?
Yes, there is, and we don't like it very much. We ask our closest friends, and they can tell you what those traits are. It's called feedback. That's where we can get it. If you do it in an appropriate way, you can get that information across. Okay, but you don't do it in the middle of a fight. But that is the best way by far. Someone who knows you very well. Here's another thing that happens to astrologers sometimes, and I know it's happened to me. If we're working with quite a few clients, they come in waves. We tend to have waves of clients where we seem to have a string of people that just can't manage their anger. We have a wave of clients that all seem to have Venus on the ascendant, and so forth. Well, what's really going on there? Well, metaphysically, it's quite interesting because we tend to attract people into our own lives to tell us something about ourselves. And that is happening many times. So if we see a wave of picky perfectionists coming as a group of clients, then a group of ones that are angry, and I'm talking about a significant number, just you need to ask yourself, now why are all these people having trouble with anger management? And then you realize it's one of your own problems. So we need to be careful about working out our problems with our clients. The model that I gave you today on 8 steps and how to go through a counseling procedure, it comes from a course that I teach that takes me 8 years to teach, those 8 steps. I've given you just a very rough model. It's a superb one to use when you're stuck somewhere in your area of life. So I hope it gives you some type of a little framework to work with. But the thing that you can do most often is to give the individual new perspectives of seeing a situation from different angles than they've ever seen it from before. Just a few other little counseling tips. Avoid restrictive language when you're a helper. In other words, the absolutes, the shoulds, the oughts. You have to be more assertive. You must stop developing those new types of relationships. That's the type of language that you need to avoid, is restrictive language. Rather than using restrictive language, and I don't want it to sound like you're being wishy-washy, but you need to qualify what you're saying just a little bit by using such phrases, your horoscope seems to imply, or what you've been saying, it suggests this, or you have the potential of having difficulty with your anger management or whatever. When you use phrases like that, you give the client wiggle room. In other words, they can move around just a little bit, because if you give a very dogmatic statement, they're pushed into the corner. Someone was saying to me the other day that no one seems to listen to the advice given in regards to the horoscopes. They seem to go out and make all of those dreadful mistakes. It seems like one of the ways of guarantee that an individual won't follow some advice through is to give it to them straight as advice dogmatically, even if that's exactly what they need to do and they know it. It's better to use a qualifier. Perhaps you would like to consider trying this, and you will be successful far more times. When you're working with the client, help that client to learn how to own their own feelings. You've heard this phrase many times. She broke my heart. He made me angry. Those type of statements are not really true, because another person cannot make you angry. Only you. The other person does something, says something, then you have thoughts about what they said or did, and then you get angry. Your anger is about the thoughts that you had about the event, not the event itself. It really helps to point that out to individuals. And if they use those type of phrases, he made me angry, you might ask the person to rephrase it and try this. I chose to feel angry when that person acted that way. So that type of counseling helps an individual. Avoid counterfeit support. Never mind, dear, we all have periods like that. Cheer up, there will be a new day, etc., etc. When a person has a problem-type situation, they do not want to hear counterfeit support, because they're saying inside, but I am hurting. That person didn't seem to acknowledge that. And it's better to say, I hear a lot of hurt in your voice when you speak about your brother. That's better than saying, cheer up, it'll be okay. Watch for the trap in labeling. Clients want labels so that they can then excuse their behavior.
And astrology is a beautiful example of
Yes. The psychiatrist tells the client he's manic depressive. Oh, now I know what's wrong with me. And they stop there and don't do anything about it. In fact, they feel quite relieved. Because the label gives them an excuse for not to do anything about it. Second square Venus is the cause of my jealousy. We have to be careful of the labels. You say it's my Saturn square Venus. It's not your Saturn square Venus. It's what you're telling yourself about the Saturn square Venus that's causing the problem. It's what you're telling yourself about it, not the square itself. Of course, the counselor needs to avoid imposing their own values
And you should state what your values are and where you come from, but respect the other person's values. Be careful of the power game. You're going to be dropped in the role of a fortune teller. And they want a magical cure. You must be terribly careful about working out your own problems through a client. In other words, you must know yourself fairly reasonably first. You cannot be an expert in all areas. Even medical doctors refer their clients to other medical doctors with particular specializations. So astrologers need to learn how, this is the hardest one, how to refer an astrological client to another astrologer who uses another system that seems to work better for that person's situation. But you also have to know when to refer them off to a psychologist, psychiatrist, medical doctor, or whatever too.
Thing is, knowing a psychiatrist or psychologist that you really trust to send them to in the first place.
Yes, I've been doing a lot of searching on that particular one. I have a few now that I can refer individuals. I have a psychiatrist, for example, who also uses alchemy and astrology, but he is a trained psychiatrist. And you need to set up your own support around you. I get clients sent to me being a psychologist from other astrologers at times too, and I know in two particular cases the problem was so severe that I had to quickly find a hospital for the person, especially in terms of potential suicide or whatever. So you must be willing to refer when you've reached your own limitations. Confidentiality. How many times have astrologers used charts of a client they had as a patient, but never asked the patient if it would be okay? I have a policy that I never use a chart of a client, but I haven't asked for the permission. Most are totally delighted to know that their chart is going to be used. I use a pseudo name, not the real name, because I do have some quite interesting cases. And I've never had a patient yet to say no to that. Now, when it comes to public figures like President Reagan and so forth, we just need to learn to be tactful with charts on those individuals. They are in the limelight to a certain extent, so we can use their charts to a certain extent. Okay, I'd like to close with a short Sufi story. Once there was a rogue who was caught by the people of a village. They